It's sometimes uncanny how fiction starts feeling like, well, reality.
Mm-hmm.
Just this morning, saw headlines about the Russian foreign secretary questioning Lithuanian independence.
I saw that too. Yeah.
And it feels alarmingly close to a scenario in this new book that's apparently flying off the shelves in Germany.
It really does. It's quite timely, unfortunately.
So today, that's what we're doing. A deep dive into that book. It lays out this fictional but frankly unsettling picture of what might unfold if Russia actually, wins in Ukraine.
And the author, Carlo Masala, he's not just spinning a yarn here. It's clearly meant as a warning.
A warning. To who specifically?
To political leaders, definitely, but also just, well, the general public, warning them not to underestimate Russia's, let's call it ambition, their aim to really disrupt European security as we know it.
Okay, so our mission today then is to unpack this scenario, to understand the key moves, the potential chain reactions the author describes, and what he sees as the implications.
Exactly. Break down the fictional crisis he presents.
All right, let's jump right in. The book kicks off with a pretty bold move, right? What's the initial trigger event?
Yeah, it starts dramatically. The scenario ignites when Russian forces seize Narva. That's a city in Estonia right on the border.
Narva. Why Narva specifically?
Well, it's a demographics mostly. It's got about, 50,000 people, but nearly 80% are Russian speakers.
80%. Wow.
And get this, almost half, 43%, actually hold Russian passports. So it's presented as this sort of plausible flashpoint.
And how do they take it? Just tanks rolling in?
Not quite that simple. The author describes it as a mix hybrid warfare tactic. So yes, some military force, but combined with disinformation, maybe cyber attacks, stirring up local unrest, that kind of thing. A quick takeover.
Okay, so Narva is seized. But while that's happening, the author doesn't just leave it there. He brings in some distractions.
Exactly. Strategic diversions. He imagines two big things happening at pretty much the same time, designed to pull attention away, especially Europe's and the US's.
What are they?
First, there's this engineered wave of refugees, supposedly coming from Mali, heading towards Europe.
Engineered how?
The book links it to, Wagner-like paramilitary groups, maybe stirring trouble there to push people out. The goal is to scare the EU, make them focus inwards, put up barriers, get bogged down in arguments.
Okay, that's one. What's the second distraction?
The second one targets the U.S. more directly. China makes an aggressive move against a small island that belongs to the Philippines.
Ah, the South China Sea.
Precisely. Designed to draw the U.S. in, make them commit resources and diplomatic energy over there, far away from Eastern Europe.
So it's like a pincer movement on Western attention spans.
Okay.
It's a window, right?
That's the idea. A window of opportunity for Russia while everyone else is scrambling.
And adding to the confusion, there's a change in Russia itself.
Yeah.
A new leader.
Yes, that's another layer. A new Russian president comes onto the scene, and he's described as Instagrammable.
Instagrammable. What does that even mean for a Russian president?
Well, think someone younger, maybe seemingly more modern, someone the Western media might latch onto and draw comparisons, perhaps superficially, to Gorbachev.
So creating uncertainty, like is this a real change? Yeah. A thaw? Or just optics?
Exactly. That ambiguity is weaponized. It makes the West hesitate, wonder if maybe this isn't the same old Russia. Should they react strongly or wait and see? It breeds confusion.
Okay, so you've got Narva taken, refugees pouring into Europe, a flare-up in the South China Sea, and this ambiguous new leader in Moscow. The book argues this basically just paralyzes NATO.
It kind of swallows the debate, is how the author puts it. All these things happening at once create massive confusion and disagreement within the alliance.
What's the core disagreement?
It boils down to Article 5. Do they invoke it immediately over Narva? Remember, that means an attack on one is an attack on all.
Which means risking a major war with Russia, possibly nuclear.
Right. Or do they wait? Do they try to figure out if Russia only wants Narva? Maybe it's limited. That hesitation, that debate, that's exactly what Russia, in this scenario, is counting on.
And that really gets to the heart of the issue the author seems to be raising about NATO, doesn't it? Like, push comes to shove, will they really defend every inch?
That's the fundamental, uncomfortable question. Is NATO, are the big member states truly willing to risk, say, Berlin or Paris or Washington for a relatively small city like Narva in Estonia?
A city many people in those capitals probably couldn't even find on a map.
Harsh, but maybe true. The author himself sounds pretty skeptical. He phrases it like, would you really risk your major capitals for this small piece of territory?
It does have echoes of things we've heard in the real world. Didn't a former U.S. president basically say something similar about, was it Montenegro or Macedonia?
Yes, exactly. There was that comment about not risking World War III over a country like Macedonia. The author clearly uses that historical parallel to underscore the potential fragility of that collective defense promise when faced with truly catastrophic risks.
So in this crisis, what power does the NATO Secretary General actually have? Can they just decide, okay, Article 5, let's go?
No, not really. It's important to understand the SecGen's role is more about facilitating building consensus. They don't have the authority to invoke Article 5 unilaterally.
But who does?
It's a political decision. It has to be made by the leaders of the individual member states back in their own capitals. They have to agree.
Which, in a crisis with lots of confusion and maybe conflicting interests, could take time.
Or might not happen at all. And that's the gamble Russia is portrayed as taking here. A relatively low-risk probe, militarily speaking, just taking one city.
Well, but with potentially huge consequences if NATO flinches. What does the author say happens if NATO doesn't act decisively?
Well, the argument is if Article 5 isn't invoked over something like Narva, the alliance's credibility is basically shot.
Destroyed.
Pretty much. If the guarantee isn't solid for one member, how can any member truly trust it? And that, according to the author, is Russia's ultimate goal to dismantle that whole post-Cold War security structure in Europe. If NATO is seen as a paper tiger, Russia's influence grows enormously.
Okay, let's pivot slightly to something happening right now in the real world. This recent mineral deal between the U.S. and Ukraine.
Ah, yes. The one President Zelensky seemed quite positive about, especially getting President Trump's signature on it.
Right. How does the author view something like that? Does he see it as a potential deterrent against the kind of scenario he describes?
He's skeptical, to put it mildly.
Why? It sounds like a big investment, American interests on the ground.
True, but the author argues it lacks teeth. It's economic, yes, but it doesn't come with any actual hard security guarantees.
Like troops or a treaty.
Exactly. And he points out, remember, there are plenty of American diplomats and business people in Ukraine in February 2022. That didn't stop the invasion. So the idea that just having mining interests there now would be a major deterrent, he doesn't buy it.
In fact, doesn't the author suggest this deal might actually be used for something else? Almost like a way out for the U.S.
That's the concerning angle he explores. That the deal could provide a kind of pretext for the U.S. to step back from active mediation. He notes a State Department statement soon after the deal, hinting that maybe the U.S. wouldn't be, shuttling back and forth between Kyiv and Moscow anymore. The implication being, we've secured our interests, now you two figure it out.
And we have heard other noises too, haven't we? Like Vice President J.D. Vance saying recently the Ukraine war isn't ending anytime soon. How does the author connect those dots?
He sees these kinds of statements as potential signs of a policy shift, especially thinking about a possible future administration change.
A Trump administration, specifically.
The implication is there, yes. A leader wanting a quick fix could potentially point to the mineral deal as a success, say we got a good deal for America, and then use that as cover to disengage from the messy, ongoing conflict. Frame it as someone else's problem or European problem.
Okay, shifting again slightly, but related to U.S. politics influencing Europe. The author touches on the situation in Germany, with the AfD party being classified as extremist.
Yes, the far-right alternative for Germany.
And the fact that some U.S. figures, I think Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance were mentioned, criticized that German decision, calling it tyranny or something.
Yeah, tyranny in disguise was the phrase, I believe.
What's the author's concern about that intervention?
His worry is that prominent U.S. conservatives criticizing a domestic German legal or intelligence assessment. It could actually boost the AfD and similar parties.
Oh, by making them look like victims of the establishment.
Exactly. It feeds a narrative that the German government is weaponizing state power against its opposition. And getting that kind of validation from U.S. figures gives that narrative more weight, potentially resonating not just in Germany, but with similar movements in France, Italy, elsewhere.
So the author sees a bigger, more worrying pattern here, a kind of alignment.
A deeply concerning one, yes. He suggests a potential convergence of interests between, let's say, certain political circles in Washington and Moscow.
Both wanting what?
According to the author's interpretation, both seemingly aiming to weaken the European Union, perhaps undermine democratic institutions within Europe.
That's a very strong claim.
It is. He goes so far as to suggest the U.S., under such a scenario, might effectively be switching sides, moving away from its historical role as a champion of liberal democracy globally and becoming more comfortable, maybe even aligned, with authoritarian leaders.
Wow. That
Of
is quite the warning, and it feels particularly pointed today. We're recording this on May 4th.
a very significant day here in the Netherlands. Remembrance Day.
Remembering the victims of World War II, it feels resonant, discussing these potential threats to democracy and European stability on this specific day.
It really does. And if you connect to that historical context, to fight against fascism, later against communism, to the author's core message, it hits harder. He argues we desperately need to, quote, reinvent the will of our societies to defend democracy.
Meaning we can't just assume it'll always be here.
Exactly. He warns against the complacency that can set in, especially for generations who've only known democratic life. Taking it for granted is dangerous, he argues.
Because the threats are real, both external, like the kind of Russian hybrid tactics described in the book.
And internal as well, threats emerging from within our own societies.
So what's the bottom line from the author? How do we defend it?
It needs a multifaceted approach. Military readiness is part of it, absolutely, but also political resolve, economic strength, and resilience. The book really is framed as a wake-up call.
Not just for the politicians in Brussels or Washington.
No, not at all. For them, yes, but also for every citizen, to understand what's potentially at stake.
So reflecting on all this, the fictional scenario, the real-world anxieties, it taps into what's a final thought we should leave our listeners mulling over?
I think it comes down to a personal question, really. Thinking about these potential pressures, these challenges from outside and maybe from within. What do you, the listener, actually see as your role? Your part in upholding, in actively defending these democratic values we've been discussing. It's something to really sit with, I think.